The commotion in the first-class cabin could be heard throughout the entire aircraft. Two burly security guards flanked a frail, elderly woman, their hands gripping her arms as she clutched a crumpled boarding pass to her chest. The woman's silver hair had come loose from its careful bun, and her worn, navy coat hung askew on her thin shoulders. But her eyes held a quiet dignity that seemed to illuminate the cramped space around her. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of the guards said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. "There's been a mistake with your seating." Zelda Morningstar looked down at the boarding pass in her trembling hands, then back up at the man towering over her. "But I paid for this seat," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have my ticket right here. Seat 2A." Behind her, a man in an expensive charcoal suit tapped his Italian leather shoes impatiently against the aircraft floor. Marcus Blackwood had built his fortune on knowing exactly how to get what he wanted, and right now he wanted that window seat. He'd been flying this route for 15 years, and he'd never once been denied his preferred seat. The fact that some confused old woman was holding up his schedule was simply unacceptable. "This is ridiculous," Marcus declared, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm a platinum member of this airline. I fly over 200,000 miles a year with you people. I specifically requested this seat when I booked, and I expect to get it." The flight attendant, a young woman named Iris with kind eyes and a nervous smile, shifted uncomfortably between the two passengers. She'd been working for the airline for only 8 months, and situations like this weren't covered in her training manual. All she knew was that Marcus Blackwood was exactly the kind of passenger who could make or break careers with a single complaint, and the woman in front of her, despite having a valid ticket, looked like someone who couldn't afford to make waves. "I'm sorry, Ms. Morningstar," Iris said, her voice apologetic but firm. "There seems to have been a double booking. We'd be happy to move you to a comfortable seat in economy, and, of course, we'll refund the difference in price." Zelda's weathered hands tightened around her boarding pass. She'd never flown first class before in her 78 years of life. The extra money had meant eating cereal for dinner for 2 months, canceling her cable subscription, and walking to the grocery store instead of taking the bus. But this trip was different. This trip was for Rosetta. Rosetta, the pianist's wife, told Rosetta, "My sister is dying," Zelda said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I used my savings to buy this ticket because I wanted to be comfortable for the journey. I haven't seen her in 3 years, and the doctors say she has maybe a week left." The first-class cabin had gone silent. Other passengers who moments before had been buried in their phones or adjusting their designer eyewear now found themselves unwilling witnesses to a scene that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. A woman in pearls and a Hermes scarf looked away, suddenly fascinated by the safety card in her seat pocket. A businessman in the row behind pretended to be deeply engrossed in his laptop screen. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Look, I'm sure your situation is difficult," he said, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "But I have a board meeting in Chicago that could determine the fate of 3,000 jobs. I need to be at my best, and I can't do that crammed into economy. Surely you can understand that some situations are more important than others." The casual cruelty of his words hung in the air like smoke. Zelda looked up at him, taking in his manicured nails, his gold watch, his perfectly styled hair. She'd seen men like him before, in the hospital corridors where she'd spent 40 years of her life, men who believed that money and power made their pain more significant than everyone else's. "I understand," she said finally, her voice carrying a lifetime of patience earned through decades of caring for others. "But I've already paid for this seat, and I need to get to my sister." Marcus's face flushed red. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy and sell you 10 times over. I donate more to charity in a month than you probably make in a year. I'm trying to be reasonable here, but my patience has limits." "Sir," Iris interjected, her voice shaking slightly, "perhaps we could find another solution." "No," Marcus cut her off. "I want this seat, and I want it now. Either she moves voluntarily, or we'll have to take other measures. The security guards had been standing by, hoping the situation would resolve itself, but now they stepped forward with reluctant determination. The larger of the two, a man whose name tag read Johnson, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to come with us. We can't delay this flight any longer." Zelda looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of her fellow passengers. Some watched with morbid curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. A few had their phones out, recording the scene that was about to unfold. But not one of them stood up, not one of them spoke in her defense. "I just wanted to be comfortable for Rosetta," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The guards began to move, their hands finding purchase on Zelda's arms. She didn't resist, but she didn't help either. Her legs seemed to buckle slightly under the stress, and for a moment it looked like she might collapse right there in the aisle. "Please," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I paid for this seat. I have my boarding pass. I just need to get to my sister." But the guards were already lifting her, her feet barely touching the ground as they began to move her toward the cabin door. The boarding pass fluttered from her grasp, landing on the expensive carpet like a fallen leaf. Marcus immediately slid into the vacated seat, adjusting his position with the satisfaction of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through emails, as if nothing had happened. As if an elderly woman hadn't just been dragged from her rightfully purchased seat so he could have a slightly better view of the clouds. The other passengers began to settle back into their routines, the uncomfortable moment already fading from their immediate consciousness. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, drinks were ordered, and the normal pre-flight rituals continued. But there was something different in the air now, a tension that hadn't been there before. Iris tried to continue her safety preparations, but her hands were shaking. She'd entered this job because she loved helping people, loved the idea of making travel comfortable and pleasant for everyone. But what she'd just witnessed felt like a betrayal of everything she'd believed about human decency. In the cockpit, Captain Elena Vasquez was running through her final pre-flight checks when she noticed the delay. She'd been flying for 23 years, and she'd developed an instinct for the subtle rhythms of aircraft preparation. Something was off. "Control, this is Flight 447. We're showing a delay on passenger boarding. What's our status?" 447, "You had a minor passenger issue that's been resolved. You're clear for pushback in 5 minutes. Elena frowned. In her experience, minor passenger issues that caused delays were rarely minor for the passengers involved. She'd seen too many situations where airline staff took shortcuts in the name of efficiency, often at the expense of basic human dignity. "What kind of passenger issue?" she asked. "Just a seating dispute, Captain, nothing to worry about." But Elena was worried. She built her reputation on being the kind of pilot who cared about every person on her aircraft, not just the ones who paid the highest fares. Against protocol, she unbuckled her harness and made her way back to the cabin. The scene that greeted her was one of artificial calm. Passengers sat in their seats, but the tension was palpable. Iris was moving through the cabin with mechanical precision, her usual warmth replaced by a brittle efficiency. "Iris?" Elena called softly. "A word?" The flight attendant approached with obvious relief. "Captain, I'm so glad you're here. We had a situation with a passenger. Tell me what happened." Iris glanced around nervously, then leaned in close. There was a double booking in first class. An elderly woman, Ms. Morningstar, had a valid ticket, but Mr. Blackwood, he's one of our platinum members, he demanded the seat. Management sided with him, and security had to remove her. Elena felt her jaw tighten. "Where is she now?" "In the terminal, I think. They were arranging for her to take a later flight." "And the passenger who took her seat?" Iris nodded toward Marcus, who was now reclining in his seat, a glass of champagne in his hand. "He said he had an important meeting." Elena studied the man for a long moment. She'd encountered passengers like him before, people who believed that wealth and status gave them the right to treat others as obstacles to be removed. But something about this situation felt different. The name Morningstar was familiar, though she couldn't place why. "What did she look like?" Elena asked. "Small, maybe 5'2", silver hair, very neat. She was wearing a navy coat that looked like it had seen better days, but she carried herself with such dignity. Even when they were taking her away, she never raised her voice or caused a scene. She just kept saying she'd paid for her seat and needed to get to her sister. The description triggered something in Elena's memory. She pulled out her phone and quickly accessed the passenger manifest, scrolling through until she found the name. Zelda Morningstar, age 78, traveling from Boston to Chicago. Then it hit her like a physical blow. Zelda Morningstar, the pediatric oncology nurse at Boston Children's Hospital. The woman who had held Elena's hand during the darkest hours of her life. 15 years ago, Elena's daughter Sophia had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She was only 8 years old, and the treatment had been brutal. For months, their world had revolved around hospital rooms, chemotherapy sessions, and the constant fear that each day might be their last together. During those endless nights in the hospital, when Sophia was too sick to sleep and Elena was too afraid to close her eyes, there had been one constant source of comfort: Nurse Zelda. She worked the night shift, and she had a way of making even the most frightening procedures feel manageable. She would sit with Sophia during the worst of the treatment, telling her stories about brave little girls who conquered dragons and saved kingdoms. Elena remembered one night in particular when Sophia's fever had spiked, and her condition had become critical. The doctors had been honest about the chances. They weren't good. Elena had been standing in the hallway, trying to hold herself together, when Zelda had appeared beside her. "She's going to make it," Zelda had said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can see the fighters. Your daughter is a fighter." And then Zelda had done something that no other medical professional had done during those terrifying months. She'd reached out and taken Elena's hand, holding it with the gentle strength of someone who understood that sometimes healing required more than medicine. "You're going to make it too," she'd whispered. "Both of you." Sophia had turned the corner that night. The fever broke, and slowly, gradually, she began to recover. Elena had tried to thank Zelda, had brought her flowers and cards and offers of dinner. But the nurse had always deflected the gratitude, with a gentle smile and a wave of her hand. "It's what we do," she'd said. "We take care of each other." Elena had never forgotten those words, or the woman who'd spoken them. And now that same woman had been dragged from her rightfully purchased seat because some entitled businessman had decided his comfort was more important than her dignity. Without another word, Elena strode to the aircraft door and began making her way back through the jet bridge. She found Zelda sitting on a bench near the gate, her small suitcase at her feet, and her boarding pass still crumpled in her hand. She looked even smaller now, surrounded by the bustling crowds of the airport, but her posture remained straight. "Miss Morningstar," Elena said softly. Nelda looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she took in Elena's uniform. "Oh, are you the captain? I'm sorry about the delay. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Elena knelt down so they were at eye level. "You didn't cause any trouble. And yes, I'm the captain. My name is Elena Vasquez." She watched as recognition dawned slowly in Zelda's eyes. "Elena? Little Sophia's mother?" "Not so little anymore," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's 23 now. She's studying to be a doctor, actually. She says she wants to help kids the way you helped her." Zelda's face lit up with a joy that transformed her entire appearance. "Oh, Elena, how wonderful to see you. Is she well? Is she happy?" "She's perfect," Elena said. "Because of you. Because you saved her life, and you saved mine too." Tears began to form in Zelda's eyes. "I just did my job." "No," Elena said firmly. "You did so much more than that. You gave us hope when we had none. You held our hands in the darkness. You made us believe that things could get better." She stood up, her expression shifting from warmth to determination. "And now it's my turn to hold your hand. You're getting back on that plane, and you're sitting in first class, and I'm going to make sure you get to your sister." Zelda shook her head. "Oh no, dear. I don't want to cause any more trouble. The man who took my seat. He seemed very important. I can wait for another flight. There is no other flight, Elena said. There's this flight, with you in your rightfully purchased seat. And there's a businessman who's about to learn what real importance looks. Elena helped Zelda to her feet and guided her back toward the aircraft. As they walked, she called ahead to her first officer. Tom, I need you to make an announcement. Tell the passengers we're experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger issue that needs to be resolved. Everything okay, Captain? It will be, Elena said. Trust me. When they reached the aircraft, Elena paused at the doorway. Zelda, I want you to know that what happened to you today was wrong. It was inexcusable, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again. But more than that, I want you to know that you're not just a passenger on this flight. You're family. And I'd take care of my family. They walked through the aircraft together, and Elena could feel the attention of every passenger as they made their way toward first class. When they reached row 2, Marcus looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. What's this about? He demanded. I thought this issue was resolved. Elena faced him with the calm authority that came from years of commanding respect in one of the most challenging professions in the world. Mr. Blackwood, you're sitting in this woman's seat. I need you to move. Marcus's face flushed red. Absolutely not. I'm a platinum member of this airline. I fly over 200,000 miles a year. I have important business in Chicago that affects thousands of jobs. I'm not moving for some confused old woman. This confused old woman, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, is Zelda Morningstar. For 40 years she worked as a pediatric oncology nurse at Boston Children's Hospital. She spent 4 decades caring for the sickest children in one of the most challenging medical environments in the world. She held the hands of dying children and helped families through the worst moments of their lives. She saved my daughter's life, and she saved mine too. The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was listening now, phones forgotten, business calls ended. She bought this seat with her own money, Elena continued. She paid full price because she wanted to be comfortable on her way to say goodbye to her dying sister. She has every right to sit here, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some entitled businessman bully her out of what she's paid for. Marcus stood up, his voice rising. You can't talk to me like that. Do you have any idea who I am? I could have you fired. I could sue this airline for everything it's worth. I demand to speak to your supervisor. I am the supervisor, Elena said calmly. I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I make the decisions about who flies and who doesn't. And right now, I'm making the decision that this flight doesn't move until Ms. Morningstar is sitting in her rightfully purchased seat. You can't be serious, Marcus sputtered. You're going to delay an entire flight for one old woman? I'm going to delay this flight until what's right is made right, Elena said. And if you don't like it, you're welcome to find another airline. The standoff stretched for several long seconds. Marcus looked around the cabin, perhaps expecting support from his fellow passengers, but what he found instead were faces filled with growing awareness of what had transpired. The woman in pearls was looking at him with obvious disgust. The businessman who'd been buried in his laptop was shaking his head in disapproval. A young mother holding a toddler was the first to speak. You should be ashamed of yourself, she said to Marcus. Treating an elderly woman like that? You ought to be embarrassed. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its bluster. I have important business. More important than letting a woman say goodbye to her dying sister? Another passenger called out. More important than basic human decency? Elena helped Zelda into the window seat, making sure she was comfortable before turning back to Marcus. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to offer you a choice. You can take the seat we've arranged for you in economy, or you can find another flight. But you will not be sitting in this woman's seat. Marcus looked around the cabin one more time, taking in the faces of passengers who were no longer trying to hide their disapproval. His important business meeting suddenly seemed less important than getting away from the judgment he saw in their eyes. Fine, he said, grabbing his carry-on bag. But you'll be hearing from my lawyer. I look forward to it, Elena said. As Marcus made his way toward the back of the aircraft, a spontaneous round of applause began. It started with the young mother and spread throughout the cabin, passengers clapping not just for Elena's stand, but for Zelda's quiet dignity in the face of such treatment. Zelda looked around in wonder, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand," she said to Elena. "Why would you do this for me?" Elena knelt down beside her seat, taking Zelda's hand just as the nurse had taken hers all those years ago. "Because 15 years ago, you taught me that we take care of each other. You showed me what real strength looks like, what real compassion means. You saved my daughter's life and you gave me the courage to keep fighting when I wanted to give up." "I was just doing my job," Zelda protested weakly. "No," Elena said. "You were doing something much more important. You were being human. You were showing love to people who needed it most. And today, it's my turn to show you the same love." As the flight began its journey to Chicago, Elena made several announcements over the intercom. She told the passengers about Zelda's years of service, about the thousands of children she'd helped heal, about the families she'd comforted in their darkest hours. She spoke about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or their bank account, and regardless of their skin color or their background. By the time they landed in Chicago, Zelda had become something of a celebrity among the passengers. People approached her seat to thank her for her service, to share their own stories of medical professionals who had made a difference in their lives. Several passengers offered to help her with her luggage, and more than one asked if they could keep in touch. Elena personally escorted Zelda off the aircraft and helped her find her connecting transportation to the hospital where her sister was waiting. As they said goodbye, Zelda pressed a small piece of paper into Elena's hand. "This is my address," she said. "When you're in town, please bring Sophia to see me. I'd love to meet the doctor she's going to become." Elena hugged her tightly. "I will. And Zelda, thank you for everything." 3 days later, Elena received a call from the hospital. Rosetta Morningstar had passed away peacefully, with her sister Zelda holding her hand. They'd had 2 beautiful days together, filled with memories and laughter, and the kind of love that only siblings can share. But the story didn't end there. Elena had documented the entire incident, and her report made its way up the airline's chain of command. The video that other passengers had taken of the confrontation went viral, generating millions of views and sparking a national conversation about how we treat our most vulnerable travelers. The airline, faced with overwhelming public pressure and a threat of a massive boycott, implemented new policies to protect elderly passengers and prevent future incidents of discrimination. They also reached out to Zelda with a formal apology and a lifetime travel voucher, ensuring that she would never again have to worry about being treated with anything less than the respect she deserved. Marcus Blackwood, whose identity had been revealed in the viral video, found himself facing a very different kind of attention. His company's stock price dropped as investors questioned the judgment of a CEO who would bully an elderly woman for an airplane seat. He eventually issued a public apology, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. But perhaps the most important outcome was the friendship that developed between Elena and Zelda. True to her word, Elena brought Sophia to visit whenever she was in Boston. The young medical student and the retired nurse formed a bond that transcended their age difference, united by their shared commitment to healing and helping others. 6 months after the incident, Elena was invited to speak at a conference about leadership in the aviation industry. She chose to focus her remarks on the importance of moral courage, the willingness to do what's right, even when it's difficult or costly. "We live in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, the biggest wallet, the most aggressive behavior," she told the audience. But true leadership means standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. It means recognizing that our humanity is measured not by how we treat those who can benefit us, but by how we treat those who can't. She spoke about Zelda, about the lessons she'd learned 15 years earlier in a hospital room, about the importance of taking care of each other. And she challenged her fellow pilots and aviation professionals to remember that every passenger who stepped onto their aircraft was someone's mother, father, sister, or brother, and deserve to be treated with the same dignity they would want for their own loved ones. The story of Flight 447 became a case study in business schools and ethics courses, an example of how individual actions can create ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate moment. It reminded people that in a world increasingly divided by wealth and status, the simple act of treating others with kindness and respect remained one of the most powerful forces for positive change. As for Zelda, she continued to live quietly in her small apartment in Boston, but her life had been enriched by the knowledge that her years of service had not gone unnoticed. She received letters from families whose children she had cared for, from medical professionals who had been inspired by her example, and from strangers who had heard her story and been moved to treat others with greater compassion. And every year, on the anniversary of Rosetta's death, Elena would call Zelda, and they would talk about life and love, and the importance of holding each other's hands in the darkness. They would remember that sometimes the person you help today might be the angel who saves you tomorrow, and that in a world where we can choose to be anything, the best choice is always to be kind.